Thank you and welcome to FCA International's April safety call. We hope everyone has had a safe and productive spring so far. The purpose of these calls continues to be to inform and work to create a community of safety professionals for the signatory finishing industry. FCA had another successful Crest Safety Awards program this year, and we're just finalizing the plaques and posters, and we'll be getting those out shortly, along with other marketing materials that go along with it. All right, and we'll have our presentation, and then there's always time for at the end for questions. But if there's any questions or anything that come up along the way, please speak up. This is your community. This is your safety call. All right, and with that, we welcome Rich Martin, a senior safety professional with OnPoint. Thanks for being with us here today, Rich.
All right, greetings, everyone. Thank you, John, for the intro. The topics today, as you can see on the screen, we're going to look at the National Emphasis Program that OSHA has just established on heat stress. And we're also going to touch briefly on hazardous communications, chemical inventory lists, and keeping your SDS books updated. For your safety needs, FCA has established the FCA Safety Helpline. The phone number is there on the screen. As always, this slide will show up again at the end, but the helpline is safetyhelpline@finishingcontractors.org. Phone number 844-414-SAFE. And we monitor those calls, we answer them, and we provide research and the answers that you need for your safety concerns. So the reason this topic comes up is letterhead April 10th, dateline April 10th of this year. U.S. Department of Labor, OSHA, has established a national emphasis program to protect workers from indoor and outdoor heat hazards. This is just a screenshot of the letter. But when they establish, the NEP goes into effect immediately, and as I think Will suggested earlier, it goes into effect for 5 years thereafter. So in 5 years, or in April of 2031, it will be evaluated as to whether or not we still need to have a national emphasis program, or can we let it drop, or should we continue it? Many of the existing national emphasis programs have been going on for several cycles, and often that is because while sometimes progress is made, sometimes significant backsliding occurs, and the numbers of injuries, fatalities, and citations go up again. But why is the National Emphasis Program activated? Because heat illness is being recognized as a serious factor in not only heat illness, but also fatalities. In fact, more than 50 heat-related fatalities just last year, and 18 in construction. Look at that bottom number, 28,000 workplace injuries related to heat exposure. When you consider that number, consider those are the workers that actually had to go seek medical attention, maybe were admitted to the hospital, but they were reported to OSHA as being a work-related injury. Now consider how many workers out there have been affected by the heat, sometimes to dangerous levels, but it never got reported. The crews got brought in, the workers got brought into air conditioning, maybe they were cooled down, given water, and that happens often. So 28,000 workplace injuries related to heat exposure. I would not be at all surprised to find out that number is actually 5 times higher. It's just only 28,000 got reported. If we look at the different, using the NAICS codes, the different kinds of operations that are affected, you'll see all of these from finishing contractors. The NAICS codes in the blue square there. So residential building construction, finishing contractors, flooring, tile, and terrazzo, and so on. The NEP, however, is not limited to just construction. It's also applied to general industry, which is manufacturing, maritime, which is anything ship-related or shipyard-related, and then also agriculture. I think where this got triggered is 3 years ago, they were noticing a significant number of workers in agriculture being overcome by heat. So the guys out in the fields picking the crops, often they were migrant workers and maybe were not being treated with the benefit of OSHA training and OSHA awareness, and employers were not looking out for those workers with the same diligence that they would perhaps with Native American or American workers. So OSHA stepped up and said, hey, we need to crack down on this more. And then as they looked in deeper, they realized that it wasn't just the agricultural workers. There were some significant numbers showing up in the construction-related fields and also in manufacturing. So heat stress national emphasis program. Remember, the national emphasis programs are temporary programs that focus OSHA's resources on raising awareness primarily on the topic, but also ensuring that compliance is achieved. The national emphasis programs that are in effect right now, the big ones related to construction, are of course fall prevention and protection. That continues to be an NEP for several cycles because still the number one cause of fatality in construction is falls, and that's falls at the same level and falls from a height, as well as things falling onto workers. So that one's not going away. Machine guarding is not going away. That has to do with being caught in running machinery, rotating and moving machine parts. Heat stress is the new addition. Excavation, big one. Finishing contractors don't work in excavations much, but in 2023, I think it was, there were 40 people that died in excavations. So OSHA resumed its focus. The NEP never expired, but they really resumed their efforts on inspections and compliance. And then, of course, respirable crystalline silica. So I can see fall prevention, machine guarding to some extent, heat stress, of course, and respirable crystalline silica being directly applicable to what finishing contractors do. Compliance officers are law enforcement officers. They are not just, like your safety pro who happens to show up and issue a safety inspection report. The compliance officers are there looking for violations of the law, just like a traffic cop is pulling you over for speeding. Very often, compliance officers, their legal status and their legal authority isn't recognized by workers and often only partially recognized by employers. But they are there to make sure you are obeying the law. And as I'm sure we've said before, OSHA standards are not just good ideas and the box of suggestions, but they are actual legal requirements. But when they show up, they can show up for any reason. It might be outreach. It might be investigations, either initial or follow-up. They'll do inspections with the NEP program. Just the fact that it's hot out, they will pop up at sites and just do a inspection related to heat. And of course, they come on the site looking for heat-related issues, and then anything else they see becomes fair game as well. They can also show up from complaints, and it may not be an employee complaint. It may be a complaint from somebody overlooking the construction site from the apartment building across the street, and that has happened. They may also show up for follow-up purposes, and they may have other reasons as well. By the way, follow-up visits. We had a client where a worker was exposed to electrical energy, basically came in contact with the power feed to the building. At first, they thought the guy was going to die. Then they thought he was going to be permanently disabled. Then he thought it was going to be a long-term. Then they finally said, well, he'll be okay, but he's going to be out for several months. 6 months after the incident, OSHA showed up, found a whole bunch of problems that were wrong, and the client was all upset that OSHA showed up and wondered why OSHA had showed up. I said, well, they were probably just doing a follow-up on the injury that happened 6 months prior with that power line exposure. So generally within 6 months, they will show up after an incident just to make sure that any abatement measures that have been committed to are actually in effect. As far as heat is concerned, anytime elevated heat is going to be an issue, don't be surprised if OSHA shows up. In fact, one client last year for us had OSHA show up 3 times, and twice of them, they were just showing up. Up there, the first bullet point says outreach. They were just showing up to see how the guys were doing, ask them questions, make sure that they were aware of how to protect themselves from heat, make sure the workers were actually implementing the heat stress program. All right, so where are you opposed to the high heat? Obviously, outdoors on hot sunny days is going to be the first answer generally people come up with when we ask that question. What is a hot sunny day? A hot sunny day is, as far as the standard or the OSHA expectations is concerned, is going to be any day where the heat index is above 80 degrees. In fact, they recommend a heat index of 70 degrees. You start cracking open your heat stress program to just look at it and refamiliarize yourself with it. You could also be exposed to high levels of heat indoors in unair conditioned or poorly ventilated buildings, under roof decks, especially those uninsulated roof decks that are still not fully covered yet. Any enclosed areas, again, that poor ventilation, buildings with limited cooling. Indoor heat can be just as dangerous as outdoor heat. Outdoor heat, you get exposed to ultraviolet light from the sun. The sun is beating down on you, but often you have a breeze that can help keep you cool. Indoors, you may not have a breeze or sufficient air circulation to allow that sweat evaporation to take place so that your body does cool down. Heat is generated not only from exterior sources like the environment and the atmosphere that you're in, or direct sunlight, or hot operating machinery and equipment, but it is also generated by internal activity. So the more you work, the harder you work, the more heat you generate. So high exertion tasks such as constant movement, back and forth, lifting and carrying, added to sunshine or high heat work environments, will boost the effects of heat stress on the body. So when we look at how to protect yourselves, note third bullet point, minimum air circulation can be a problem, but it's a problem we can beat by opening up windows and doors, by adding sufficient fans to actually move the air around. Breaks are often not emphasized. In a proper heat stress program, there will be a heat monitor, a person dedicated to monitoring the program and monitoring the condition of the employees. And it has to be intentional. How are the workers doing? When's the last time we took a cool down break? Has it been more than an hour, hour and a half? All right, we're going to knock off for 5 minutes to just rest in the shade, drink some water, look each other in the eyes, and make sure that we all look like we are still mentally, our mental status is still good. A lot of employers expect employees to provide their own water. Frankly, a lot of employees prefer to provide their own drinks because they have a choice of what to bring. But a lot of times they make choices that are not really good for helping keep their hydration working for them. And of course, production is always a big push. We need to get this stuff done by the end of the day. And how do we do that? We work faster, we cut the breaks and minimum breaks. So when we talk about breaks, we are talking about even those people who don't want to take a break, make them take a break anyway. So OSHA does not require a heat stress program yet. They have been talking about bringing it up. It's in the review stage right now. It's being reviewed by stakeholders who are giving their input on what's involved. It actually might be beyond that stage at this point. And then at some point, it's going to have to be approved once all the changes have been made and then implemented. I have not heard anything about an imminent approval or release of the program, but OSHA is enforcing heat stress protection under the general duty clause. So when the OSHA compliance officer was showing up at our sites last year, they were making sure that the workers had a good awareness, that the employers were providing water, and provision for shade breaks and things like that. Standard is being developed. If you look at the image there on the screen, that's just a screen grab of the FCA heat stress program that's available in the FCA Safety and Health Manual. It is based on the California model. We have heard that the OSHA model may be a little bit more stringent. For example, there were some complaints about OSHA wanting to have on-site medical treatment personnel. That was probably going to be more for general industry, but dedicated people who were there who could treat people, first aid, or medical treatment and monitoring. There was a lot of pushback on that because now we have to have a dedicated nurse on staff. So that's still that has not been decided yet, as far as I'm aware. But there's an example of the heat stress program. As the compliance officers were coming out, primarily they would come out and say, "Hey, I'm here from OSHA. Just want to talk to you a little bit about heat." So here's where they are doing their outreach programs and their education programs. Keep in mind, when they are on your site, if they see other things going on, they may change that outreach drop by to, "Oh my, you're up there on that boom lift and you don't have tie off." Now it becomes an incident. But they were looking for employee knowledge. Did the workers understand the signs and symptoms of heat-related stress? So he might ask, "Hey, what are some of the signs and symptoms of heat exposure? Some of the signs and symptoms of heat stroke? Do you have available water? Is it cool water, or has it been sitting on a skid in the back of the truck, sitting in the sun? And not only is the water quite warm, but the sunlight and the ultraviolet is affecting the water bottles and leaching those forever chemicals and those microplastics into the water as well." So obviously, available water is best kept in a cooler with some ice. Remember that we don't want that water to be too cold, because a hot body that has a elevated body temperature suddenly being shocked with water that's just above freezing can often trigger a cardiac dysrhythmia. So be careful with the water being too cold. Is there provision for available shade? In other words, are there trees that you can hunker down under? If you're in an open area, throw up some canopies. If you guys are in a building, find an area that not only has some protection from the sun, but also some good air circulation. And that's that available means of cooling. A lot of guys in the beginning stages of construction or the outdoor construction, their available means of cooling, often the only thing they have is their cars and trucks to sit in with the air conditioning running. Not all that effective. So with the heat stress program, do you have a plan? As we review the heat stress program that's in the FCA manual, remember you need to have a plan when that heat index gets above 80. We need to trigger that plan. We don't have a plan. What are we going to trigger? It's basically going to be everybody does what they think is best, and we're flying by the seat of our pants. If we take a quick look at this heat index table, for example, let's see here on a 70 degree, it starts at 80. On an 80-degree day with 80% humidity, you're in the caution level. You're only at 84% heat index. It's enough to trigger the plan, but people can work in 84 heat index, not much of a problem. But if you jump the temperature up to 84 with 80% humidity, now it feels like 94 degrees. And now we're in the danger zone. And if we were to go up to 90 degrees at 80% humidity, now we're up to 106 degrees. So this table is color charted to let you know, hey, these are the temperatures that you have to be careful, the areas where you have to be really careful, the areas where it's dangerous and maybe you should consider not working that day. And then the red area is extreme danger, where it might be a good idea to stop work or find some work you can do in a cooler area. Low risk is less than 91 degrees heat index, moderate risk 91 to 103, and then very high to extreme, more than 115 degrees. Consider our warfighters when they were fighting in the Middle East during the Afghan and the Iraq wars. Very often these guys were exposed to 120-degree temperatures or more, while wearing full uniform and carrying gear and performing their activities. So those guys had to drink a lot of water, and their rest breaks were pretty much half an hour for every half hour worth of work. Here, continuing in the program, we had that caution area, less than 91 degrees. Here are some things that should be done. For example, provide drinking water and remind workers to hydrate frequently. You don't need me to read this to you. I'm sure you can read it faster than I can to you. But in the manual, there's the section, hey, here's a basic plan on what to do when it's 91 degrees or less. Here's a plan on what to do when it's above 91 but below 103, and so on. And you can sit there and say for the high heat index, remember that's the temperature you're seeing is not the temperature, that's the heat index temperature. It might be 99 degrees outside with a heat index of 115. So what do? Maybe we reschedule non-essential activity for days where it's cooler, or we move essential work tasks to the coolest part of the day. We know that the warmest part of the day is typically between approximately 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. The type of work you guys do, you can't just sit there and say we're going to work from 6 to 11 and then we're going to pick up after 3 and work until 6. But maybe instead of starting work at 6, you might start work at 5 and work till 11. It's just a plan to consider. The manual also provides a hot weather pre-planning checklist. So you can use this basically, hey, have we covered these bases? We're coming into hot weather. The time to do it is now, before things get really hot. What kind of hot weather supplies do we need? Do we need canopies? Do we need water? Do we need dry powder electrolyte mix we can add to the water to turn your drinking water into Gatorade so that people get their electrolytes replenished? Who is going to be in charge of the monitoring plan? Who do we call in the event of an emergency? All of these things should be looked at in the plan. Here's your daily planning checklist. This is good for the person in charge, typically a crew chief or a foreman, or if you have the ability to put a dedicated safety and health professional in place to watch out for all things safety, they can use this to make sure that all of these boxes are considered and checked off. Heat-related emergencies, if we look at what are the signs and symptoms of heat stress, heat rash is typically going to be the first one you feel, and that's where you get that prickly heat. Kids are very susceptible to this. Then you work your way up to heat cramps, and then heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Heat stroke, anytime in medical terms you hear the word stroke, you need to think serious medical emergency up to and including death. All right. So note that for heat exhaustion, you're going to have cool, moist skin. But for heat stroke, it's going to be red, hot, dry skin and very high body temperature. Why is that? At the heat stroke level, you've pretty much run out of fluid to sweat. You've run out of your body has run out of the ability to keep itself cool by shunting blood around, by constricting and dilating blood vessels. So that's why it is such a serious issue. If someone is not sweating, is not acting right, and they have red, hot, dry skin, it's time to call 911 and treat the person very gently rather than pouring a bucket of water on them and saying, get back to work. But these are all in that program. Have your plan and intentionally implement the plan. We need to evaluate heat stress conditions the day prior, not the day of. Oh my, it's hot. Where did that come from? Well, with all of the ability we have now with weather apps and listening to the radio and computer sites that can tell you all of these things, news reports will usually tell you, yeah, tomorrow's going to be a hot one. Make sure that key responsible persons are notified. Get a hold of your foreman the night before and say, hey, it's going to be a hot one tomorrow. Plan accordingly. Make sure you have plenty of water. Schedule early. Make sure you follow through. That means make sure that plan is being implemented and that it's effective. And then after the heat period is over, review that plan and find out where the shortcomings were, where it fell down, and make adjustments so that the next time you have a heat event, you're already on top of that game. This is a screen grab from the OSHA NIOSH heat safety tool. It's an app that's available for your mobile devices, iPads, iPhones, Android phones. When you boot it up, it starts with this screen and then it gives you this screen here. And it lets you know the day I took this screen grab at 7:14 in the morning, it was 66 degrees outside, 85% humidity, and it felt like 66. Why was there no significant bump up in heat with the heat index? Probably because there was a good breeze that day. Winds 5 to 10 miles an hour will get that heat index, that real feel temperature down. But if you were to click on that yellow precautions button, then it would pop up with some of those things that we've already seen in the previous slides. Make sure you evaluate heat stress conditions the day prior. We already talked about that one. But your engineering controls are going to be the things you can put in place to either prevent the injury, the hazard from existing, or protect workers from the hazards. Cooling fans may be necessary. Just a quick aside on that one, I was in a site where it was really warm and they were running internal combustion engines inside. And I said, it's really warm in here. Maybe you should bring in some fans. I came in a couple days later. They had brought in these big fans, internal combustion engine driven 6-foot fans on truck trailers running indoors. And I'm just kind of shaking my head because now they're introducing all the carbon monoxide from the engines in there as well. So when you put in fans, consider the type of fan you use. I don't see misting fans as being particularly relevant to what you guys do, but something to consider for areas maybe that are, not in the finishing stage yet. Identify air-conditioned areas of refuge and rest. Some larger construction sites may even bring in cooling buses. So they may have a school bus or a tour bus in there with air conditioning, and there might even be a first aid person or a nurse in there able to monitor people and take temperature and give water and replenish electrolytes. But do consider what are you going to do when guys are getting hot? You have to do something a little bit more than just, why don't you walk over to your car, which happens to be 2 blocks away, and sit in the air conditioning for a while. We want anybody who's having effects of heat to be close to hand so you can monitor. Are they getting better or are they getting worse? Is heat exhaustion progressing to heat stroke? So don't leave people to themselves, and maybe provide tents and canopies. Already talked about starting that work earlier or later based on those high heat periods. You may want to rotate workers. Maybe people don't, maybe you have an activity that's in high heat areas and other activities that are not in high heat areas. Maybe instead of having the same couple people working in that high heat area, maybe you can have them work in the high heat area for a couple hours and then rotate someone else to that task and rotate the first guys to a cooler task. Does require management. It has to be intentional. Never trust guys when ask them, hey, are you okay? How you doing with the heat? Oh, I'm fine, boss. I'm fine, boss. A lot of times guys won't admit that they have a problem because it could be perceived as a sign of weakness. So don't wait for them to tell you they have a problem. Actually stop the work, issue water all around. Don't even tell them go get water. Show up with water and say, hey, here's a bottle of water. How you doing? Oh, I'm doing good. Thank you. It'll help build that rapport and make those employees feel like their workplace actually cares about them. And it also makes sure that they are getting the interventions they need. Cool drinking water, that's going to typically be between 35, which is pretty darn cold. That's only 3 degrees above freezing, to about 60 degrees. A lot of guys will take a cooler, fill it with water bottles, and then just pour a big bag of ice over the top. That makes really cold water. Some people actually add salt to the water as well, and supposedly that makes the water even colder. But remember, if somebody's having heat exhaustion or heat stroke, we don't want to give them water that's too cold. And we already talked about leaving the water out in the sun where it where it can get way too hot. A lot of employers pass the buck to the employees for providing the water. I always just recommend have the foreman, when he goes to work, he's going to top off the fuel on his fuel cans and his equipment and his trucks. If they use that, stop off at the 7-Eleven or the gas station, pick up a couple of skids of water, and put them inside the truck. Electrolyte drinks are good. Avoid providing sodas, caffeinated beverages like Red Bull or Monster. Those caffeinated beverages actually will pull water out of your body. That's a diuretic. And drinking the sodas and the caffeine drinks will actually reduce the amount of moisture they have in their body to regulate their temperature. The OSHA guys came out and were asking about training. How do they know if you've been trained? Well, you can answer questions appropriately. So they would be looking for things like, what are some of the hazards of working in high heat? And the workers will say things like, oh, heat stress or heat stroke or dehydration. You know, okay, good. What does that mean? What are some of the signs and symptoms of heat-related illness? Well, if you're sweating a lot, that means you're at high risk for dehydration. So we need to replenish our fluids. Okay, that's good. That's good. What happens if somebody stops sweating? Well, if they didn't do something to make themselves stop sweating, then that could be the sign of a big problem. So we need to get medical attention for them. So those would be appropriate answers that would assuage a OSHA compliance officer's curiosity. Reporting needs to be addressed. If there's an issue, how are we going to report it? Who are we going to report it to? Obviously, if a worker's having an issue, hopefully he'll report it to the foreman. The foreman will run it up the chain to the superintendent on the site and maybe his supervisor. Supervisor may run it up to, I don't know, whatever you do internally. But if there is an incident where the worker actually requires medical intervention beyond first aid, you may have to also report it to OSHA on your OSHA 300 log. And if the patient ends up requiring hospitalization, then you have to directly report it to OSHA within 24 hours of the incident. But the plan will address all of those things. What's your response going to be if someone complains of a heat-related emergency? Not only is it a good idea to activate first aid for that individual, but it's a good idea to sit there and say, we have an incident here. Is anyone else having issues? And bringing everybody in to make sure that none of them are having effects as well. Do you have a first aid provider? Often guys have some basic first aid, as in I know how to put a Band-Aid on, I know how to put a cold pack on, but do they know what to do for heat-related illness? For example, a 5-gallon bucket of water, cool water, placed on the ground, and a worker thrusting his forearms into that water will dramatically reduce internal body heat because of the radiator effect of all the blood vessels that are in your forearms. Getting a person out of the sun, for example, and into a cooler area, and then spraying them down lightly with water to just cool the clothing down will help draw heat out of the body as well. Applying cold packs to the hot, sweaty parts of your body, armpits, abdomen, stomach wall, groin area, will also dramatically cool down the body much more quickly than just kind of waving a piece of newspaper at them. There are other cooling means that are available as well, such as cooling vests that actually actively will cool you down. Some of them will have a fan that circulates air around your body. Others will have cold packs that you can wear inside the vest that can cool you down. Some of them are water-based, but there are other means out there to keep people cool. At the beginning of the heat season, and we're, not quite at the beginning, I guess we'll start seeing significant heat, probably starting early next month, middle of next month. Remember that workers need to become acclimatized to the new heat levels. So that means that if it has been cool for a while, workers might need a couple hours of working in the heat and then moving to a less hot environment, also increasing the intake of fluids until their body gets used to the new heat. Arizonans, for example, say they can always tell when the tourists are in town because the tourists are the ones outside. And the ones outside are the ones complaining about the high heat. But when you go to Arizona, 120 degrees to them is like 100 degrees to us, and vice versa. My mom lives in Arizona. She comes here, and it's 50 degrees in here, and she's wearing a parka and shivering because she's not used to the cool temperature, and we're running around in light shirts. So the body does need to get used to the temperatures. This is also true of new hires and new workers. We don't want to take a new hire and just throw them right in there. We need to watch them and make sure that they are acclimatizing to that heat. And the same thing for workers who are coming back after an extended time off. Think of someone that was off for several weeks or a couple of months after an injury. When they come back, they're going to need time to get used to the heat again as well. If heavy human effort is required, reduce work periods, increase breaks. So if we are digging a deep hole, maybe it's time to dig for 10 minutes and break for 10 minutes and let someone else dig for 10 minutes, whatever the activity is. But remember, when it's 70 degrees outside, guys will work 2-3 hours and no problem, and they'll have a short break. They'll get back to work. In high heat temperatures, it might be an hour. Guys should always have water with them, and they should be consuming water throughout the day. Every 15 minutes or so, they should be taking about 8 ounces of water. Supervisor must be looking for and be alert to the signs and symptoms, and the workers should look out for each other as well, because they're the ones that are, together. And if someone starts acting off, I refer to it as like the Snickers bar commercial. If someone starts acting like they need a Snickers bar, it might be because the high heat has elevated their body temperature to the point that their brain isn't working properly anymore. Similar to oxygen deprivation or chemical exposure. So if people aren't acting right, don't just assume they're having a bad day or they're just kind of cranky today. Actually give them some water and keep an eye out for them. Make sure that they're sweating. Make sure that they're replenishing their fluids sufficiently. And if we don't see improvement, consider bringing them in for first aid evaluation or maybe even ambulance response. Consider also getting one of those electronic thermometers that you can point at the forehead and take a temperature, and you can obviously, if they're out in the direct sunlight, it'll throw off the reading. But give them a few minutes to cool down, get them out of the sunlight, and then get a temperature reading and see if their temperature is above 98.6. Generally, 100 is fever, and you don't want to be above 100. Your body is really good at keeping your temperature around 98.6, but once you get past 100 degrees internal body temperature, you start getting hyperthermic, and that can affect your brain and even cause brain damage and seizures. So look out for each other, consider the Snickers bar principle, and that's what I have on the heat stress program. John, do we want to break here for questions before we move on to the hazard communication?
If anybody has any questions related to that, they can certainly ask it now. But if not, you can continue to move on.
All right, I don't see anyone jumping on it. So if we have any questions on heat-related stress, we'll, of course, allow time for those after this period as well. All right, hazard communication is a subject that we need to touch on every year. We're going to touch on it not quite as basically as we typically do because we cover it every year and it's available for review, the recorded sessions. But one thing that employers need to understand with the hazard communication standard is that one of the first things you need to do is you need to identify what hazardous chemicals you use in the workplace. This is the most commonly neglected point of the hazard communication standard, which is 1910.1200, and it is very often cited. This image here is in the hazard communication program in the FCA manual. This is an older image prior to 2012. This is pretty much what OSHA required. They wanted to know name, who manufactured, how to get a hold of people, phone numbers, all of that. When they updated the standard in 2012, they essentially said you just need to have a hazardous chemicals inventory list and keep it updated. Well, coincidentally, the table of contents in your SDS book happens to be a list. And if it is accurate, in other words, if it represents the contents of the book, and it is easy to find the contents of the book based on the table of contents, then that would meet the standard. So we don't have to go running around tracking down all of this information for each individual chemical, but we do have to have that list. The unique identifier is generally the product name. However, there are cases, I'm hoping I put the slide in here. Yeah. There are cases, for example, you guys use, or some finishing contractors use methyl ethyl ketone a lot of times, but it is constantly referred to as MEK. And if someone were to look at the SDS book for MEK, but it's listed in the SDS list as methyl ethyl ketone, they may never find that SDS sheet. So when we talk about the unique product identifier, the name on the list must also match the name on the SDS. If there's a common name, an alternative name that is used, such as MEK, then you make sure that the SDS list says MEK by methyl ethyl ketone, and you make sure that the SDS sheet, someone writes in MEK up at the top, right where it says methyl ethyl ketone. And that way the common name is usable to find the information. You must have an SDS for all chemicals on the list, and frankly, you should not have an SDS for chemicals that are not on the list. And this happens often when we've used these chemicals for the last 10 years, but 2 years ago, we replaced this chemical with this chemical, and all we did is add the SDS sheet to the book. We didn't update the table of contents of the list, and we didn't remove the old SDS. So when we talk about updating our SDS books, that's what we're talking about, making sure that they are current, they have what is required, and nothing more. And a note on removing SDS sheets from your SDS book, my recommendation is remove them from the book and archive them for 30 years. You know, I don't know what the magic number would be. But if you have an employee 10 years down the road is showing signs and symptoms of a disease related to a chemical exposure, and they ask, have you ever been exposed to such and such? And he thinks about it and he says, yeah, I remember that one. Or maybe you can go back in the archives and say, yeah, we used to use this one. Here's the SDS book. Sorry, the SDS sheet that was relevant at the time. You can provide that information for medical treatment. And also, you know, on the part of the employer to show, yeah, you know, we had the SDS and we informed our workers of all the hazards, and here we go. So the SDS book and the SDS chemicals inventory list needs to be continually updated, reviewed annually. I like to see SDSs in there no more than 2 or 3 years old. The reason is a chemical may have been formulated one way 5 years ago. 3 years later, they come up with a formulation that's maybe safer or maybe cheaper to produce. The hazards have changed. So the old SDS is now obsolete. The new one needs to be added. So some guys subscribe to an SDS service where they just, it's like an online app, and they just tell the SDS service, these are the chemicals we use. And the SDS service always provides the latest SDS sheets. Remember, that's only as good as your input. So if you have changed chemicals and haven't let the service know, they won't be providing you the SDS sheets you need. This is the example I'm talking about here. So here we have a chemical called rubinate 1245, which is probably the common name, but it is also called modified polymeric MDI isocyanate. So if you are looking for one under one name, you may not find it under the other. Make sure that you review your list of hazardous chemicals annually. This is going to have to be a dedicated, put it on your planner thing, put it in your Outlook calendar, whatever calendar app you use. You know, 1 week reminder in 1 week, you have to review the SDS inventory list. and then it pops up that day. Make sure that it is consistent with what is actually used in the field. Make sure that those SDSs are updated. Again, as I said, no more than 2-3 years old, preferably. And retail items that are used as intended by the manufacturer do not require SDS. So consider a can of spray paint. It's a hazardous chemical. If you look on the can, it'll say things like don't inhale, if swallowed, do this, that, and the other thing, and it'll tell you what the hazardous chemicals are. But as long as you are using that simple can of spray paint as intended by the manufacturer, you don't need that SDS. Where this becomes kind of tricky is the manufacturer typically intends a person to use no more than 1 or 2 spray cans of spray paint at a time. Now imagine you're doing some kind of work, a special color. Let's say you're rehabbing a wrought iron bench, and you buy a case of 12 paint cans to do your paint. I know I'm talking to painters, and they're like, "What?" But this actually happens. You know, people will sit there and buy the stuff off the shelf, and they're repainting this entire wrought iron bench with the spray cans, which means they are exposed to that chemical much more than was intended by the manufacturer. In that case, maybe they need to wear a mask. Maybe they need to wear special PPE. Maybe the exposure to the chemicals is greater than was expected. So in that case, you would need to have an SDS. So just muddying the waters a little bit there. Make sure your SDSs are complete and the pages are in order. A lot of times a SDS will get pulled out of the book if it wasn't stapled together while it was in the book. The pages might get shuffled around, or one might get blown away by the wind and nobody chases after it and recovers it. SDSs have been pulled out of books and never put back, which is another reason why the SDS book needs to be reviewed. But make sure the SDSs are complete and in order. Figure out which way you want to order the SDS book. There's no rules. If you want to order it alphabetically, you can do that by type of chemical, by function. You know, the painters use these chemicals. So this section will be called painting, and the only thing in that section will be the chemicals used by painters. Flooring guys use these chemicals, and the only SDSs in there would be the SDSs for what they use. But whatever system works best for you, just so the guys understand how it works and how to get to those SDSs quickly. Remember, the SDSs are there especially for chemicals you don't use commonly. You know, what are the hazards working with this chemical? Well, let's review it before we do it. Or if you start using the chemicals differently in a different manner, you should review those SDSs. Or if it's a chemical where you're watching people and you're thinking, these guys are getting really complacent with this chemical. They're not taking it seriously. They're not wearing their respirator masks properly. They're not wearing the right type of gloves. They're not ventilating enough. Hey guys, let's pull out this SDS book and review it, or SDS sheet, review it, remind ourselves of what the hazards are, what the PPE requirements are, what the signs and symptoms of exposure are, what first aid measures are. All of those will be in those SDS books. Local copies should be available at all work areas. Some guys say, yeah, we have it on our device. And I'm asking, well, what happens if you're in an area where there's very poor cell coverage? Are you going to be able to get to it? Well, we have them at the office. If we have a question, we'll call them up. Well, once again, the cell coverage issue applies. Or what if your device, the battery is low? That could be an issue. What if the server is down? I'm an old school guy. I like a book, a paper book with me so that I can thumb through it. I can read it. I can point at it and say, it says right here. Plus, if the EMS ever has to show up for treatment for an exposure to a chemical, I can just give them the hard copy SDS sheet. The paramedics can look at it and say, okay, I can see how to treat this. He can bring it to the ER, and the ER doc can say, okay, great, I know what to do here. It's just really handy to be able to do that. In local areas, such as a fixed facility, let's say your shop, your yard, your office facility, you can have them there. You can have them near the emergency station. What's an emergency station? Might be an area where your first aid kit is, your AED, your bloodborne pathogens kit, eye wash solutions, things like that, or near an exit. I like near an exit. If you happen to have a hazardous materials incident, when you're running out of the building, grab the SDS book and take it out with you. because when the hazmat guys show up and say, what do we got? You can just give them the book and point. So that's, again, why I like a hard copy. Inspect and update regularly. I'll beat that one to death. Up-to-date SDS book. Keep on the foreman trucks for mobile work. Keep in the gang box. I think generally you guys are subcontractors. When you show up to a site, the general contractor usually wants you to provide the SDS sheets for the chemicals you'll be using. Remember to provide them the SDS sheets only for the chemicals they're using. They don't need a book with all 50, 60 chemicals that you might possibly use. Limit the stack to just the SDSs that apply to the work you're doing. When you develop a site-specific safety plan, we were briefly talking about that before we started. Consider reviewing those SDSs for the chemicals you're using. You might need to add a section in your site-specific safety plan on how to handle those chemicals properly, what you're going to do in an emergency. And then make sure not only that all workers know where the SDS book is, but if I said, hey, can you find me the SDS for MEK? They could find it. If I asked them what the hazards are, they should be on the first page. They should find it with minimal effort. Something simple about show me what I need for PPE. They should be able to do that. Am I going to come in and look for that? No, probably not. But an OSHA compliance officer might. So keep that in mind. Remember to provide awareness training of all hazards presented by the chemicals being used and specific hazards for those chemicals that are of significant hazard. MEK, for example, is a very dangerous chemical. People have to be squared away on what protective measures, and not just PPE. What about ventilation? What about neutralizing substances? Do we have the ability to do that? And what would be the appropriate first aid? Do we have a first aid trained person there? And do we have the appropriate first aid adjuncts and materials we need to perform first aid? And the SDS will tell you, for example, none come to mind, but a chemical might say, if you get this on your skin, wash with soap and water, right? Do you have soap and water on site, or do you just have water available? But be aware of that. If SDS is pulled for whatever reason, training purposes, to give to another party, to give to EMS in case there's an incident, remember to replace it immediately. Those are the points we planned on covering for heat stress and for the SDS books and the chemical inventory lists. Before you again is the slide indicating the phone number and contact information. And we will now open things up for questions.
All right. Great stuff, Rich. Any questions from anybody?
No, thank you so much for the info.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We'll leave it at that. Just again to emphasize that for anybody that doesn't have an FCA safety manual yet and want to access that, whether to use it or to use it as a reference to compare against what they already have, feel free to reach out. They can be requested at safety helpline at finishingcontractors.org. We'll again have another safety call here in May, so look forward to that announcement. And we'll leave it at that. Rich, thank you for a fantastic presentation, and again, always insightful on these topics. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Take care, everyone. Have a safe month.
Thank you, you too.
Take care.